All right, let's dive right into what is, for so many people, one of the most significant and deeply personal questions of our time. What does the Bible actually have to say about homosexuality?
Let's just get straight to the point. This is the core question, isn't it? And we all know it's a deeply charged one. The goal here is not to add more heat to the debate, but to just walk through as clearly as we can what the biblical texts say. And look, it is so important that we remember, this isn't just some abstract theological exercise. For so many people, this is about their identity, their deepest relationships, their very sense of self, and how God sees them. The stakes feel incredibly high. So, we've got to approach this with both clarity and a whole lot of compassion.
So, if you're looking for the short answer, the conclusion drawn directly from the texts is this. The Bible consistently presents same-sex sexual behavior as being outside of God's original creative design for humanity. Now, let's unpack how we even get to that conclusion.
Okay, so where do we begin? Well, we have to start at the beginning, with the foundational texts in the Hebrew Bible, what many call the Old Testament. The first key passage we encounter is right here in Leviticus. It's a very direct prohibition, and it's actually repeated a little later in chapter 20, placing it right alongside other very serious sexual ethics violations.
Now, to really understand this, we have to zoom in on the specific Hebrew word used here, tu'ava. This word is a big deal. It's not just about something being ritually unclean, like eating shrimp. This term is reserved for practices that are seen as fundamentally violating God's moral character and created order, things like idolatry or profound injustice. It's about morality, not just ceremony.
So when people ask, but hang on, isn't that just an old ceremonial law that we don't follow anymore? The answer really lies in the context. These prohibitions are framed as moral laws, meant to set Israel's ethics apart from the surrounding cultures and reflect what was understood to be a timeless standard of holiness. Okay, let's jump forward now to the New Testament and see how the writings of the Apostle Paul build on this foundation.
In its theological masterpiece, the letter to the Romans, Paul talks about a distortion of God's design, describing both women and men engaging in same-sex behavior, and he uses some very specific language to do it.
And the key phrase here, the absolute linchpin of the passage, is the Greek paraphasin, which means contrary to nature. Now, for Paul, a deeply trained Jewish scholar, nature wasn't just about biology. It pointed directly back to God's created order in Genesis, that fundamental original design of male and female.
And you've got to remember, Paul was writing into two totally different worlds at once. In the broader Greco-Roman culture, same-sex acts were pretty common, but often tangled up with power, status, and exploitation. But Paul roots his argument firmly in the Jewish understanding that sexuality is all about that one flesh union established way back at creation. Then when you get to 1 Corinthians, Paul uses two super specific Greek words, malakoi and arsenokoitai. That second word is fascinating. It actually seems to be a word Paul himself created, pulling directly from the Greek translation of that Leviticus passage, smashing together the words for male and bed. The understanding is that together, these terms cover a whole spectrum of same-sex acts, not just, say, abusive ones.
So, that's the main textual argument. But of course, that's not the end of the conversation. There are some really common and important questions that come up. Let's tackle a couple of them.
The first one you often hear is this. Wasn't Paul just talking about exploitative relationships, like between men and boys, or maybe pagan temple prostitution? Both were definitely happening back then. The problem with that interpretation, though, is that the language itself seems much broader. The laws in Leviticus are part of a wide-ranging sexual ethic, and Paul's words in Romans, consumed with passion for one another, that points to mutual consensual desire, not just a one-sided exploitative act.
Okay, another one you hear a lot. What about David and Jonathan? The Bible says their love for each other was incredible, passing the love of women.
Well, when we read that through our modern 21st century romantic lens, we're kind of forcing our own categories onto an ancient text. In their world, deep, loyal, covenant friendship, a bond where you would literally die for each other, was this celebrated, incredible ideal, and it was totally distinct from a sexual relationship. The text never mixes that powerful emotional intimacy with sexuality.
And this is where the entire conversation has to make a crucial pivot.
Because honestly, this isn't about singling out one group of people. It's actually about a universal call to holiness that is unbelievably demanding for everyone.
Look, the biblical sexual ethic is incredibly tough for everybody. I'm talking about the single person who is aching with loneliness, the married person with deep unmet needs, the pastor who is secretly struggling with pornography, the person tempted by an affair. The standard of reserving sex for a marriage between one man and one woman requires a profound sacrifice from all of us, no matter who we are.
And that reality brings us right to the heart of the matter. It shifts this whole thing away from being a list of rules and regulations, and it turns it into a question about our relationship with God.
And if this standard is universal, it absolutely demands humility and consistency, especially from the church. It means that things like lust, adultery, and pornography have to be addressed with the exact same seriousness. And it means the church has to become a genuine, loving, supportive community for every single person who is trying to live a faithful life.
And this really boils it all down to one single powerful question. It's not if following Jesus costs us something. Of course it does. He told us to take up our cross daily. The only real question is this: do we believe that He is worth it? Do we love Him more than all the other desires this world offers?
And that is the bottom line. This whole teaching ultimately isn't just about sex, it's about lordship. It poses the same question to every single one of us, regardless of our specific struggles or attractions. Will you surrender all of your desires to Jesus? Because the promise is that if we do, He gives us the grace and the strength to overcome any vice and to live a life that truly honors Him.